one of the nice things about having children is that they grow up and then can become very useful. And since they are that generation after me, it's my daughter who said, you have to have a PowerPoint when you present about your book, and then she helped me generate this PowerPoint, which I'm going to be showing you at this time. Now, she went to Haverford College. She grew up in Pittsburgh Meeting, and then went to Haverford College. And at the end of her 4 years, she got what is called a Watson Fellowship. Watson as in IBM Watson. And the fellowship is actually the best thing I've ever heard. You get to go around the world for a year and do whatever you want to. Wow. The only stipulation was you couldn't come back to the United States unless there was some like family emergency or something like that. So she decided that she would, her mother's Kenyan, and I'm the father. And so she decided she would go to England, Kenya, which is where her mom is from, Zimbabwe, and Jamaica. And she would study or talk with black-white couples and their children. And then when she came back, she wrote a book, which is called Figment of Your Imagination. How many people here have a copy? I know you do. A number of people.
We'll get some more afterwards, I'm sure.
Pardon?
I said, we'll get some more after you hear you.
Anyway, this is a picture of my two children when they were nice and cute. And the reason for the picture you can't probably see from where you are, but it says above Joy, it says black, and above Tommy, it says white. And the story, which he reports in the book, but we had to tell her, was that when she went, her mother went to the hospital to have, for Joy to be born, there was a nurse there, and the nurse was asking, all those questions they asked. And then she said, what is the race of the child? And my wife said, human. Well, she wasn't very happy with that thing and said, well, there's sickle cell anemia and this and that, and she wrote down black. So on her birthing, there's a birthing document that she gets before the birth certificate, and it says black. So a year and a half later, Tommy went to the same hospital. We went in, in front of the nurse and did all the paperwork, and she didn't say anything about it, ask us anything about race. And then when we got the birthing document, it said white. So that's one of the stories that she has there in her book. And I think her conclusion, maybe if I give you the conclusion, you won't read the book. I won't buy the book. But anyway, her conclusion is that in the United States she's considered black. In England she's considered mixed. In Kenya she's considered white. In Zimbabwe she's considered colored. And in Jamaica she was considered brown. And her status changed drastically depending upon the country. Particularly in Zimbabwe, to be colored is to be at the totem. That's the bottom society, because blacks are higher and whites, of course, are higher. So the colored were the lowest class in that society. On the other hand, in Jamaica, the lighter your skin, the higher your prestige. So her landlady, Joyce said one of the reasons to go to Jamaica was to see the sun. Of course, that got her darker. And her landlady said, you shouldn't be sitting in the sun because you're getting too dark. You won't get a good light husband. That's what she said, exactly like that. Just to finish maybe that one up, Joy now is she was just finished a stint as being interim director for the Institute for Policy Studies, which is a progressive think tank in Washington, D.C. And she continued working there as their administrative person. And my son Tommy is a fundraiser. He fundraises for the African Great Lakes Initiative, but he also fundraises for a AIDS clinic called the Carl Vogel Center in Southeast Washington, D.C. And then he also started a place called Cornerstone, which is a home assisted living home for men who have been in jail so long that they can't really cope in the society without being, without help. So it's like a community home. So Joy finished this book in 2007, and shortly thereafter, both she and Tommy said, Dad, you really should be writing a book. So I sort of put it off, but they kept at it for me, on me to write a book, and they said, it's not just, we don't want a biography or autobiography. We want to learn what you've learned over the years that you've been in Africa. And I'll tell you more about my history in a little bit. So I spent about 2 years writing the book. The first 6 months, I must have thrown 90% of it away because I didn't really know what I was doing. And then I live in Kenya, so I was back in the United States visiting, and I was talking with my 2 kids again. And so they sort of clarified for me sort of what I should be covering and how I should be covering it. And so that sort of gave an outline of what you're doing. And then, of course, once you know that, then it's easy to start filling things in and doing that. And both of them helped in editing the book in different ways. Joy is much more the kind, it will say, well, this isn't really very good. And Tommy is the one who says, well, you need to be deeper about this. What did you feel about this? What were you thinking at the time of this kind of thing? And then Don Rupert, who's here, helps copy edit the book. I've written a lot of short stuff things, articles. And a book, as I learned, is very different than an article, because an article you start at the beginning and you go to the end and it's sort of all one thing. And you can remember your punctuation you were using at the beginning, then you use the same kind of punctuation or the same spelling or whatever, or the same capitalization. And but when you start getting in a book, you forget which, should you be capitalizing internet? Now there's a good question. Do you capitalize internet or not?
Yeah. Yes.
How many say yes? How many say no?
Yeah, you're supposed to.
It's yes. I mean, in my book it's yes. Yeah, there's all kinds of these things you get. Actually, one of the problems is I tended to capitalize a lot of words, like the people we used to do in the old days. Because the tendency now is to do a lot of lowercase kinds of things. So here's my PowerPoint, and this is the first that I've tried doing it this way. The book is really into 4 sections. The first couple had to do with the culture and customs of people in the Great Lake region of Africa, which I'll discuss a little bit. And the second one has to do with the peacemaking work, or the third one actually, the peacemaking work that I've been doing completely since 1998, but also somewhat before that. And then the last one is, what are the kinds of things that the United States, the international community, NGOs, and the world should be doing in order to make this part of the world a prosperous, peaceful kind of place. So Joyce says, when people want to read your book, they want to know who you are and something about you, so that they have some kind of connection. So that I'm starting out with my connection. Now, oops. There's me when I was cute.
Did you say cute or cute?
Cute. And this is my brother, Paul, who's a year older than I am. And this is my mother, Helen Jane Zarembka. I was born in St. Louis, as she was. And I think I'm very much my mother's kid, but I think the thing to say about her is that she graduated from the University of Missouri in Columbia in 1936, and she majored in mathematics and minored in astronomy. And at that time, she said I was the only woman in any of those classes. I don't know if this, maybe it's just easier for me to walk over. This is the house that I grew up in. We moved here when I was 3 years old. It's in a suburb of St. Louis called Clayton, a very small community, which even, I was just there with some people. I was just in St. Louis and did a talk, and some people still going to Clayton High School where I went, and said it's the best schools district in Missouri, or at least in the St. Louis area. And that's why my parents moved there, because it had such a good public school system. This is my father, Richard. He's Zarembka. Many people think it's an African name, but in fact, he came from Poland when he was 8 years old. My grandfather came in 1914 from right before the beginning of the First World War. He lived in the Russian part of Poland, was then divided. He lived in the Russian part of Poland, and had he remained, he probably would have been killed during the tremendous amount of, the deaths in that part of the world were just amazing during the First World War. But he had come to the United States just right before it, I think, just like many people are doing these days, coming to the United States to work for a while, make some money, and send it back home, and that kind of thing.
But he brought his children with him.
Pardon? No, he didn't. He left my grandmother and my father in Poland, and he was going to come back. So that's what. And my great-grandfather came to the United States for 7 years and then went back. In those days, there was no visa, there was no passport. You just came and went, and the world was nice in those days. Since I have so much trouble with getting visas for Africans to get in the United States, it's one of the most difficult things I do. And he was a photographer. Particularly, this was, starting in the 40s, 50s, 60s, when cameras weren't very good, and it was difficult to take pictures of kids. So he really liked being a portrait photographer of children, and that was sort of his specialty. Then, as cameras got better and better, people didn't really come so much for kids. So he got into taking weddings, and I figured he took maybe 700 weddings in his life. Now he didn't. It was good money. I mean, people buy a lot of pictures when they have a wedding. But he said after you've been to about 5 weddings, they're all the same. And you always got to take the same pictures of the cutting the cake and all that. My brother Paul, which is here, is professor of economics at the University of Buffalo. He's a Marxian economist, which means he's not particularly on the upswing in American capitalist society. But he's also edited a book whose name I can't quite remember, but it has to do with the 9/11 and the questions and the problems that are being covered by 9/11. Actually, if you put Google and you put in Zarembka, you get him before you get me, because his book has been quite controversial. And there's me. And then this is my sister Elaine, who's a doctor and lives in Israel and is head of the medical services for the Negev, the southern desert part of Israel, and has been there since 1976. And my last sister is Arlene, who still lives in St. Louis and is a lawyer and specializing in gay and lesbian issues. Her biggest case was in whatever 5th Circuit, whatever one is in that part, where she overturned a St. Louis city ordinance on cross-dressing for the ACLU, because two men who were dressed as women were prosecuted under this law. Now, one of them they just picked up in the park, but another one had an act, in a bar where they dressed up, dressed up like women. Well, so she took that case all the way to the 5th Circuit, arguing that the discrimination, that if a woman dressed like a man, there's nothing illegal about that, and therefore you had to. And she won. And then some people in the accounts department, when you win a case, the other side's got to pay. The losing side's got to pay. The city of St. Louis didn't want to pay because they didn't like the outcome of the case. But then when the lawyers for St. Louis heard this, they made them pay up right away, because lawyers aren't going to stick together. They're going to get paid regardless of the outcome of whatever trials are. That's my sister's name. Right. I think I'd rather just. Okay. Yeah. This I want to give you an idea of cultural issues. And this is Wilson Melinda, and he's my first father-in-law, in other words, the grandfather of my children. And I got married there in 1969. And the custom is in Africa is that when people get married, the groom and the bride's families get together and they discuss things. But I didn't have any family there, so I had to do it myself. So one Sunday afternoon, I went to their house, and my wife-to-be had arranged all this for me, and I was, welcomed in. Now they knew me very well, and they knew we were going to get married and all that. But they didn't know anything much about my family or my background, except for that I'm American, and therefore, that I'm American, and then therefore I should be very rich. So the first question they asked me was, who's your parents? And I said, well, it's Richard and Helen James Zarembka. And that was good because it showed that I came from a good Christian family because there was only one wife. Then the next question was, well, how many siblings did I have? And I had one brother and two sisters. And that was kind of small because they had 9 children in that family. And they asked, well, what did my father do? And I said, well, he was a photographer, and they understood that quite well because Africans like to have pictures of family members all around the room. That's the custom that they have. And then they asked, well, what kind of house did I live in? And I said, well, I had a 2-story brick house, and the one you just saw, and that was impressive. And asked me if my dad had a car, and I said yes, and that was impressive. And then they asked me, and how much land does your dad have? And I said, well, 1/4 of an acre. And his shoulders went like that. Because in Africa, to have 1/4 of an acre means you come from an extremely poor family. In fact, you're almost destitute because people grow their crops on their land. And he himself has 15 acres. And by the way, where he lives, those 15 acres are probably worth $10,000 an acre now, because land is very expensive in Africa. So that means he's worth $150,000, which is more than most Americans. But anyway, he then tried to say, well, what do you grow on your plots? And I said, I forgot to show you in the picture there's an apple tree. And I said, well, we have one apple tree. Nonetheless, we got married and things. Now, I went to, when I finished high school, I went to Harvard. And actually, I don't always say this one, but I was an affirmative action person. I was from the Midwest, and at that point, Harvard was mostly an East and New York City institution. They were looking to branch out. I also went to a public school, and they were trying to branch out to public schools, and they were looking for people with difficult, unpronounceable names. They wanted to diversify, and there was no doubt that I was in a program that, I was given a scholarship, partial, but I didn't have any loans at the end of it too, which was a real advantage. But I was given a scholarship, and I know that part of the reason was because they wanted somebody, and I did okay in my SATs and things like that. So after when I went there, I pretty much joined the Phillips Brooks House Association. Phillips Brooks is the one who wrote The Little Town of Bethlehem, but he started the social service work at Harvard way back in 1890s or something like that. And so they had a whole bunch of programs, and so I became involved in their programs, working in settlement house, what they call settlement houses in those days. And then later in my 3rd year, I worked at a program which gave away paperback books to kids in inner city schools in Roxbury, if you know Boston. And when I was there, I met Allison DeForge, who's in the picture here. And the previous summer, she had gone with the Phillips Brooks House program to Tanzania to teach Rwandan refugees. from the time of independence. There were a lot of refugees from Rwanda, and some of them had come to Tanzania. And she had gone, she and another woman named Karen Weiskopf, who I also knew, had gone there for the summer. But they decided that going just for the summer was too much. It was too little time for the amount of money it cost. And by the way, I can almost go to Africa now, to Kenya anyway, for the same amount of money that I went in 1964, if I go in the right times of the year. A little bit more, but not a whole lot more. Then they changed the program for a year, and so the people were asked to go for a year. And Allison encouraged me to apply, and I did so. And since she was on the selection committee, I got
Selected?
yeah, I got selected. I don't think there was any much doubt. But anyway, and then she encouraged me to go teach in the same region in northwestern Tanzania, right next to Rwanda and Burundi, Rwandan refugees. And I taught there with another person who some of you may know, named Randy Keeler, who's from Coleraine, Massachusetts. Anybody know him?
When you're talking about refugees, you're talking about in the 60s refugees
Oh,
from
yes.
Rwanda?
Yeah.
So we're going way back as far as the Sudan wars and stuff.
Oh, yes. Time of, well, get into Rwandan history, but the Belgians did not discourage the violence that happened at the time of independence. And so there were well over 100,000 refugees from Rwanda by the time of independence in 1961. But that's one of the things, there's cycles of violence. The genocide just didn't all of a sudden pop out in 1994. There were the various cycles of that. Anyway, now Allison, we stayed in good contact. She wrote her PhD thesis was on something that nobody can do anymore, in that she went back to Rwanda and interviewed all the old people who could remember when the Europeans first came to Rwanda. And I read a book called Scramble for Africa one time, and it didn't have one quote from an African about the Scramble for Africa. And her book is, see, it's something like, "The only bad news is defeat." And it gives us history of that period when the Europeans first came from essentially the African point of view. It shows how the various different African cliques in the kingdom at that time used the Europeans and the missionaries for their particular purposes. A very different kind of history than we have. It now is just published. And then after her kids got older, her daughter, by the way, went to Haverford also. She got back into doing work on Rwanda and started working with Human Rights Watch. First to be just on their board on Africa, and then started doing work with them in Rwanda, and started well before the genocide, investigating the many massacres that had occurred at that time. And one of her recommendations, in Rwanda, you have an identity card, like a driver's license here, and on it said if you're a Hutu or if you're a Tutsi, are the two different ethnic groups. And so she went to the government and then to the various different embassies and got them to agree to issue new identity cards without the ethnic classification on it. And sort of had it all worked out, but nothing ever happened. And so when the genocide came, you could just ask somebody, "Where's your identity card?" And if it said Tutsi, you were killed. And if that had come through, who knows how many people would have been able to slip through otherwise. She then wrote for Human Rights Watch the best book on Rwanda. If you really want, it's about 800 pages long, so it's really detailed. but it gives you all the ins and outs of what happened, and it's called Leave None to Tell the Story, Genocide in Rwanda. At the moment, if you want to get a copy, you have to pay somewhere between $200 and $600 on Amazon, because somebody in England, where the libel laws are very loose, sued Human Rights Watch. And so they had to withdraw the book from circulation in English. Now, if you want to read it in German or French, you can get it, and they're translating it now into Kinyarwanda, if you know Kinyarwanda. And I've been told that they're going to reissue the book again. But I have a copy, which I got when it came out. You may remember in February 2009, there was a plane crash in Buffalo. Well, she was on that plane. And we were just, Gladys and I, where's Gladys? Gladys, wave your hand. This is my wife, Gladys. We just since we've been back this month, or last month in June, we visited Buffalo and stayed with her husband to see how he was doing. And he's doing fine. Now,
she was just about to go and testify, was she not?
Oh, she was testifying all the time. She'd been at Arusha, the International Tribunal, I don't know, many times. And she would be on the stand for like 2 weeks at a time. She was the expert witness, and they would, give the history and this, that, and what people had done, and things like that.
We were reading on the Wayne Madsen report about how many crosshairs she was in because of what she knew.
Yeah, she was also, she was no longer able to get into Rwanda itself because she was accusing the Rwandan government of various things that they shouldn't be doing. So after I finished teaching the Rwandan refugees for a year, I did have to promise my dad that I'd go back to Harvard and finish my last year, which I did, and it was probably the most difficult year of my life. And then I went into the Peace Corps in Tanzania, and then moved because after about a year and a half to Kenya, because relations between Tanzania and the United States was going downhill. The reason is because Tanganyika combined with Zanzibar, and Zanzibar had recognized East Germany, and Tanganyika had recognized West Germany, and so when they had Tanzania, they decided, well, we'll recognize both. And this really upset the American government, and things just went downhill. That's how things were in those old days. Old guys can remember those things. But after that, one of the people that I had knew from the Peace Corps, a Kenyan, asked me to start a high school in Kenya. And this was shortly in 1969 after independence. And so there was a big emphasis on education and building schools, so I started a secondary school. This is me then. This is the local chief of the area who I worked with. This is Mutheki Ndeti, who's the brother of the people that asked me to do this school. And that's where my first wife came from. And this is east of Nairobi in Kenya.
Is your school still there?
The school's still there. It's got about 450, 500 students, girls. Because this was right after independence and girls hadn't been given much of a chance for education previously, we had, when we took our first intake, we had a number of really good female students. And they did the exams there, and when the exams came, they did really well. They did the second best in the whole district, and this was the first time they ever took exams. So it got a reputation of being really good for girls. So more really bright girls came, and then the government took over the school later and decided to make it into a girls' secondary school. So now it's just a girls' school. After I finished that, we came back to the United States, and I lived in Pittsburgh for a good while, and then I was in Rockland County, outside New York, in Rockland Meeting for a while, and then I was in Yellow Springs, Ohio for a while, and then I moved to Washington, D.C.
How did you come to Quakerism?
Back when I was in Clayton in 1961, I turned 18 years old, and I had to register for the draft. So I walked across the park, and I said, I can't kill anybody. I was raised as an Episcopalian. So I signed up to be a conscientious objector. And then in those days, you know, you had a long form with all these kind of questions to prove that you were a legitimate conscientious objector. And realistically, they only gave status to Mennonites, Quakers, and Church of the Brethren people. And I wasn't any of those. But anyway, to answer those questions, I said, well, I better, you know, learn something about it. So the first book I picked up was Leo Tolstoy's The Kingdom of God is Within You. And the first chapter, about half of it, has to do with pacifism of the British Quakers. Now, I've since reread it. It's not particularly good, but I didn't know that at the time. So when I went to Harvard, within a week or two, I decided to go to Friends meeting at Cambridge, and I attended there. And from the first day, I liked it, and I've been going ever since. So, if there's been a meeting around anyway, from where I am.
So when you said you came back from Africa, you came back with a wife?
Yes. So I got married there. That's when Wilson, the old man, when I had to go speak with them, then we had the wedding there. Now, anyway, Gladys and I met. Everybody thinks it's going to be real exotic somewhere in Africa or other, but we met at the Bethesda meeting outside of Washington, D.C. in 1965 because 95, sorry. Because her grandmother had become a Quaker in about somewhere around like 1920 in Kenya. So she was Quaker, and she was taking care of some girls, and one of them was going to Sidwell Friends school. The lower school is where the Bethesda meeting is, and so she saw the sign, and so we met there at the meeting, and so that's how we got married. And we were married in the United States.
Did she stay out with the son so she could get a nice life husband?
Anyway, so now we live in Kenya, in Western Kenya, which is where most of the Quakers of the actually world live.
You've had two wives, so what happened to the first one?
Well, she lives in Washington, D.C., right across the street from Joy, and helps take care of Joy's 1.5-year-old baby.
You're divorced.
Yeah, we were divorced a long time
Does
ago.
not have two wives.
No. Although, if we went back to Kenya, it'd be okay. Except for maybe for the wives. So we live in Western Kenya, where there are probably 200,000 adult Quakers, which would be about half the Quakers of the world. And they all live in the western part of Kenya. And or most of them, like that, that's where she was born. And we live in the area where the Quakers are quite numerous. Like where her father is, you can walk down the road and there's a Quaker meeting started in 1917. You then go a little farther, there's a Quaker girls secondary school, and then there's a Quaker primary school, and then there's another church started in 1920. And then, you know, density of Quakers is really high in this area where she was born. Now, where we live now is a little, can't remember if this slideshow has a map, but I think it does. But don't worry, we'll get to it if we do. But anyway, we live in Western Kenya in a town called Lumakanda, which has maybe 500. I think it has 500 people. Gladys thinks it has 1,000. And it's we just have a building plot in the town, even smaller than a quarter acre. And it's the district headquarters, so there's the police station and the hospital and schools and the administration and things like that. And it's where Gladys's daughter and 2 grandsons live 2 or 3 miles away, and one of her sisters. And she also has a son who lives in Nairobi. And so this is the town street. And these two guys here are motorcycle taxi drivers who are waiting for, you know, somebody that needs a ride to the road. Now this is the house that we live in. I think it cost us about $30,000 to build the house, and with everything that it has. It has 4 bedrooms, of which one is my office, and it has 1.5 baths and a small inside kitchen, an outside kitchen, an outside latrine, 2 more bedrooms outside, the chicken coop, the place to keep the sheep, the gardens, all are there. And these people here are the group, I think in 2007, who came on an African Great Lakes Initiative, which is called AGLI, work camp to Kenya. And so one Saturday they came to our house and we had, you know, lunch with them and things like that. So those are the people who came for that. So that's what our house is. And this is, by the way, a very typical kind of house. Now, not for people who are modestly well off.
What's up on the roof? Is that something?
That's a tree.
That's a tree.
But we do have a solar, it's not there yet, but we do have a solar panel, and we have regular electricity, and we have Gladys, well, there's a water tank right here, and another water tank in the back, but we're also in the municipal water thing, and then there's a well next door, so we can always have water one way or the other. Because electricity frequently is off. Oh yeah, here's our map. This is the map of the Great Lakes regions of Africa. This is Tanzania, this is Kenya, and this is Uganda. And then you see here's Rwanda and Burundi. And then this is the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. And there's a province called North Kivu, another province called Lake Kivu. This is the Lake Kivu. This is called South Kivu. And this whole area is really one geographical entity, and the common language for everybody in this area is Swahili. And when I was in the Peace Corps, I learned Swahili, so I can speak with people in this whole region.
So where do you live again?
Okay, I'll go through that. This is where I taught the Rwandan refugees. You see right near the Rwandan-Burundi border. Then when I was in the Peace Corps, I was near Musoma here. Then when I started the high school, I was here in the Mua Hills, east of Nairobi. And now we live in Lumakanda, right there, which is near Uganda. And Mount Elgon is right there on the border between the two countries.
So you're really not far from Kakamega at all?
Oh, no, we're 30 miles, 40 miles.
So Rwanda and Burundi, they were kingdoms of very strong kings, and that's how they managed to keep their little peace when the white people were carving up everything else. I mean, usually a little country like that represents a very strong personality that preserved the borders when everything else was going somewhere else.
Well, the Mwami, the king of Rwanda, used the German soldiers to conquer this part of Rwanda. This part of Rwanda was a separate kingdom, and he used them again to conquer that part of the called Giseka. Burundi also was the kingdom was actually right just in the middle of the country, but nonetheless, I mean that's how it happened. The local people used those missionaries and the colonial military, particularly to enhance their their territory.
They were all capitalists, they were just with different colors.
Well, okay. Anyway, so that's the region. So let's go. And just one other thing. Here's Lake Victoria, second biggest lake in the world. That's why it's the Great Lakes region. This is Lake Tanganyika, which is the second deepest lake in the world, plus all these other ones that are everywhere. Now I want to go a little bit into the kind of things that I discuss in the book. If you watch TV or see things, you get all these advertisements to support poor African, usually orphans or things of that. And you see kids who are very dirty with flies in their face and bad clothes and all those kinds of things. Essentially, the NGOs in the United States have a race to the bottom. If you can show the most wretched pictures of some poor kids, you can raise the most money. And this is the way it's done. In fact, those kind of children are very rare, and you have to actually work at finding those kinds of pictures. So I decided that I needed to take pictures of a much more positive aspect of Africa. So on Christmas Day, this last Christmas Day, I went to Lumakanda Friends Church, where Gladys and I attend, and took pictures, there are 8 of them in the book, of kids dressed up in their Sunday best on Christmas Day. And the point is that the custom in all this region is on Christmas Day, everybody gets new clothes. So the kids get a new suit of clothes, the women get a new dress, the men don't really follow these things too much. But you can see how, sharp, they say sharp, to say how the kids are dressed. And this is, when you think about it, I mean, there's millions and millions of kids on Christmas Day who got new sets of clothes in just Kenya. And so this is actually a much more realistic picture of children in Kenya than those things that you see on your TV commercial advertisements. Now, another idea is that, that poverty leaves you with, no toys and things of that sort. For some reason, collecting teddy bears and sending them overseas is something that people do that, well, it's not very useful. Now, this picture was taken in Bujumbura in Kamenge, which is the slum of Bujumbura, Burundi. And Burundi is like the 3rd poorest country in the world. So here you're in the slum of one of the poorest countries in the world. And you have this kid with this amazingly elaborate truck. You can see here, he can steer the truck. It goes back and forth. You can see, you can turn the wheels. This little right here is a little gizmo that makes noise like a truck when he pushes it along the road. It has a place that he's carrying a rock at the moment in his little truck. I've seen kids with these little trucks be told to go to the store and get some sugar, and they get a half or a pound of sugar and they put it back in their truck and they drive it home. Now this is mostly made out of wire and just things that are thrown away for the wheels and stuff. And so you can make amazingly elaborate kinds of toys out of pretty much nothing. Gladys just bought for a little over $1 a push toy in Kenya, made totally from recycled stuff, cans and plastic containers and things of that sort. So the idea that kids are deprived all of a sudden just because they don't have that latest Fisher-Price total McDonald's drive-in kind of thing is, erroneous. Now, another thing about Africa, and other places too, is stereotypes. So, among the Hutu and the Tutsi, the stereotype is that the Tutsis are tall and the Hutu are short. That's one of the stereotypes. Now, in this picture here, there's one Mzungu. Mzungu is a white person. I think you can figure that's me. And there's two Hutu and 5 Tutsi in this picture. Now, since Tutsi are supposed to be tall, you would assume that this person was Adrian Diongabo, our person in Burundi, is the Tutsi. But in fact, he's a Hutu. So it just shows that the stereotypes that you have for all kinds of these things frequently, lots of people don't fit their stereotypes. Somebody like to read this thing? This was a report on January the 7th, 2008, when the conflict in Kenya, where Gladys and I lived through the fighting after the election there in late 2007. And this is a report that was put on the thing. So would somebody like to read this?
Reports of ethnic killings continue to stream in from the countryside. with an official in neighboring Uganda confirming 30 Kenyan refugees were thrown into the border rivers by attackers and were presumed drowned. 2 Ugandan truck drivers carrying the group said they were stopped Saturday at a roadblock mounted by militiamen who identified the refugees as members of Kibaki's Kikuyu tribe and threw them into the deep, swift-flowing Kipkaren River, said Mbaza Hashaka, a Ugandan border official. The drivers said none survived, Hashaka said.
Well, the first thing is the Kipkaren River is about 3 miles from our house, and where we go for our post office. We have our post office box, and it's not near the Ugandan border. It's about 70 miles from the Ugandan border. So next picture, please, Emily. This is the Kipkaren River during the dry season, which is January. It hadn't rained for probably about 2 months, and so the river is not fast flowing at all. As you can see, if you were thrown off the bridge into this puddle of water, you might get hurt, but you surely aren't going to drown. There's a local Quaker peace activist named Florence Machayo, so I asked her, well, is this true? And she said, it's a lie. This story is total fabrication. If 30 people had been thrown off the bridge into this river, everybody in that area, we would have known all about it, and everybody would be talking about it, and you know, there'd be tons of discussions and well, all kinds of things. This was, go back to the previous picture. This was put out by Associated Press. It was in USA Today and CNN and Fox News. I emailed Associated Press and CNN telling them that this story was a fabrication, and I got no reply. And I asked them to retract it. Now, interestingly enough, there was no Kenyan newspaper or TV who reported this story. If they had reported this story, this would have been one of the biggest massacres during that time. And particularly, you know, January 7th, the conflict started on December 31st, so this would have been within the first week. It would have inflamed, you know, passions in the country and led to more violence. And yet, I mean, if you all saw this on CNN or, you know, Fox News, I guess you all watch Fox News.
Just keep an eye on it.
I see the clips on Jon Stewart.
Anyway, you know, you had no way to know that this was totally not correct.
Why did they do this? Why did they publish it?
But you get, this is common.
Yeah.
My book has 3 or 4 more examples of interpretations and misinformation that's given out. Well, some journalists, obviously, now you can think of this. This is terrible journalism. Somebody in Uganda had to have interviewed this Hashaka guy, who said about what these drivers told him. I mean, you're already in second or third, you know, person report, so it's unverified, you know, piece of information. But it fits into the stereotypes that they had. I mean, you know, can you see it here? Ethnic killings and the Kikuyu business. That's the interpretation that the newspapers gave to you about what was happening in Kenya. In my book, I have a section that gives 9 different interpretations of what happened, starting out with ancient tribal hatreds, which is what you all got, and showing that, you know, if ancient tribal hatreds is an explanation for the violence in Kenya, then clearly ancient tribal hatreds is a good explanation for World War I and World War II. You know that animosity in the French and the Germans, the English and the German, all that kind of. So it doesn't explain anything, but that's what's fed to you by the media in this country. I guess you got to go 2 now. After the post-election violence, the Kenyan Quakers became extremely active in the post-election period, and they formed an organization called Friends Church Peace Teams. Now, we in the United States, AGLE is part of Friends Peace Teams. So they said Friends Church Peace Teams. And I was going to say, well, that's too similar. But then I said, well, they should be able to choose whatever name they want. So that's what they chose. And the first activity they did was to give relief to people who needed. This is This is Joseph Lamai, who's the chairman of the Friends Church Peace Team, and this is one of the committee members, and they're giving a blanket to this internally displaced person. And here, this is Rama Dunn, who's giving out food to people at that time. He's an Australian Quaker. And they did a most interesting kind of thing, which was when the violence came, they went down to the local big town, Kisumu, and bought up t-shirts, blank t-shirts, like the one he's got with nothing written on it. And then they stenciled on the front, Amani Kenya, which means peace Kenya. And on the back they wrote, Upende Jirani, which means love your neighbor. And they bought them for about 50 cents a piece, showing that you can buy clothes in there that comes from America, cheaper than you can buy it here. And put the stencil on, and then sold them for about 30 cents a piece. Because they weren't looking to make money, they wanted to have people have this, you know, these t-shirts. And they made and sold 12,000 of these shirts. And Gladys got about 400 of them and sold them to people in our community. And so seeing, you know, people walking, and they were from little kid shirts to, you know, extra large size shirts. And you could walk around town and people, you know, would see them. And I still wear mine, and people, instead of calling me Mzungu, they'll call me Amani Kenya instead. So that's still a nice sign of what they've done. Now, one of our real goals, and my real goals, in fact, of even writing the book, is connecting the Africans and Americans or Europeans, Canadians together. And we do post what we call we do work camps, and we also post extended service volunteers. And whenever we do our publications, we usually pair up a Mzungu and a local African. This is Florence Ntakarustimana from Burundi, who's one of our people there in Burundi. And this is Stephanie Mahler, who at that time was a student at the Center for International Training in Brattleboro, Vermont. And they did wrote one of our best publications, which is called Now I Am Human, about the reconciliation work we're doing there. But what the African Great Lakes tries to do is to bring those people together. We have a number of people here who have gone on our trips. We have Sandy Draper, who went to Kenya, what, 3 times, 4 times? 4 times. We have Emily Higgs, who went once and stayed as an
In Rwanda, yeah.
in Rwanda. Okay.
Bob Barnes is at the gathering too.
Pardon?
Bob Barnes is at the gathering.
Yeah, Bob Barnes went 2 times for us to Kenya and also went to Rwanda a little bit. Anyway, so we try to get people to go to interact. We also try to get the Africans to come to the United States. As I say, our biggest problem, because most of the people we work with are young, it's particularly difficult to get visas for them to come in the United States. So I hope I've gotten kind of good at doing it, but we don't always succeed.
Florence was at the second Johnstown gathering.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a complex question, but why is it so difficult to get visas for Africans?
Well, because they think that everybody's coming here is going to stay. And so they have a thing, person does not have enough economic, social, or something else, reasons for returning to the country. So if the person doesn't own property, have a good job, a wife, kids, you know, yeah, if you're if you're a son of an MP or something, you know, you get your visa like that. But, you know, our people aren't those kind of
Well, the
folks.
crime is too that they, at least in Uganda, they have to pay like $100 with their application.
Oh,
And
yeah.
if they get refused, they don't get the money back.
All right.
And that's our embassy's taking that money, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I would say, well, okay, Friends United Meeting is having their triennial right now.
No.
Or, I mean,
Will be.
well, I'll be there. 51 Kenyans went in to get visas, 19 received them. So that's, 32 that did not. So about a third got them and 2/3 didn't. And I asked, well, who got them? And they said, well, elderly men are the ones who got most of the visas. But on the other hand, I mean, Gladys knows well, Kenyans who come to the United States to go to the triennial and never have gone back. So they use that as a method to immigrate to the United States. So it's not exactly like,
It's not like
Right.
they're not making part of it.
right.
What's the name of your organization that people come from?
African Great Lakes Initiative, AGLI.
Yeah, but the one you were just,
And
you're
part
talking
of
about the
French
FUM triennial, right?
Yeah,
Friends of that?
Friends United Meeting has their triennial, so we'll be there actually for that. Now, here's another extended service volunteer. This is Gladys, and this is at the Kamenge Clinic that we do in Bujumbura, Burundi, in that slum. We have a clinic mostly for AIDS, women with AIDS. This is Alex Nibona, who is the doctor for the clinic and was on our first work camp we did there in 1999. And this is Alex Douglas, who originally comes from Tennessee, worked for FCNL for a year, and then was with us for 18 months in Burundi at the clinic, and has just returned and is going to Johns Hopkins to get to become a doctor and a master's in public health.
She was just at the Uplands Retirement Village in Pleasant Hill, Tennessee, where we live, and gave a report on her work.
Yeah, but anyway, she's great. Okay, anybody have any ideas what this picture is of?
Katrina.
Okay, she's right, New Orleans. This is a Katrina picture. And so let me read a passage from my book. Shortly after Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, I was passing through Kampala, Uganda. I read the following story in the Monitor, one of the major papers in Uganda. There is a group of HIV positive women in Kampala who work together in an association. Their work is to pound rocks into gravel, which is then sold for construction. I've seen these women along one of the roads next to a ridge full of large rocks. They sit on the ground and with a small sledgehammer pound away, turning the rocks into a heap of gravel. The paper indicates that they earn about $1 per day for this back-breaking work. These women had heard about Hurricane Katrina and how it had destroyed so many homes and possessions of the people of New Orleans. They decided to donate over $900 for the relief of the victims of Hurricane Katrina. When one of the women was asked why they would do this when their own condition was dire, she replied, "Our custom is to help people when they are in difficulties. We see that those people have lost everything, so we want to help out." It is sad to think how little $900 contributed to the relief of Hurricane Katrina victims. On the other hand, the response of these HIV-positive rock-breaking women, through their humanness, their connection to suffering all over the world, is overwhelming. You want to give me the last one?
You just need to click off of it.
So I wrote my book and I printed 3,000 copies. I sold 427 at the moment that I know of. And I need to sell around 1,000 before I break even. And if after I break even, then any surplus goes to the African Great Lakes Initiative. So I want to encourage you to buy a book. And I will sign them for you, and this is the reason. I was giving a talk in Eden Seminary in St. Louis about 5 or 6 years ago. And I was there with a woman who had written a book about Nicaragua in the 1980s. And it probably cost maybe $5 or something like that in those days. And somebody came up and said, "I want you to autograph my book," her copy of the book. And she said, "Well, fine." And I said, "Well, sort of why?" She said, "Well, I saw that your book was being sold on eBay for $50. So if you guys buy a book and I autograph it, you know, in another 25 years you might be able to sell it for $1. Now, what I'd like to, how much time we got?
About 10, 8 minutes.
Oh, 8 minutes, then we can't do my next exercise.
Oh, come on. Want to do something?
Okay, Okay, we'll do it, and if we have to quit, we quit. Okay, what I have is, now, my daughter Joy, who would like to do a reading of sections of the book, raise your hand and she'll give you one. A reading of the book. Now, Joy says that people want to hear the voice of the author in the readings. But I've already been talking for an hour, and I think it gets audience participation. So we're handing out, I think, I forget how many of these I have. But if people would read it over and then stand up, it works better if you stand up and read your, no, forget the backside. I don't know why I put it on some used paper.
So you want the pages read in order?
No, I thought, no, it doesn't work. It's too difficult to do that. So anybody who feels moved can stand up and read.
Many international NGOs pay sitting allowances for people to attend meetings, seminars, workshops, and other activities promoted by the NGOs. This might surprise you. People are paid to be involved in learning opportunities for their own benefit. Sometimes this pay is significant. I have heard of $35 per day payments for attendance to participants when the daily wage was $1 per day. I was told that in Burundi, an important person is given $200 to attend a seminar. No wonder people want to attend and give glowing reports of how good the workshops were that day. I do not know of any NGOs in the region except some Quaker ones that do not pay sitting allowances. This includes the United Nations organizations, for example, which pay peace committee members in Kenya $10 per day to attend one of their meetings.
There is another side to this custom of helping people out. Unlike the U.S., where people look really well off, but are almost in bankruptcy as they cannot pay off their loans, in Kenya, people want to look poorer than they are so that other people do not expect too much from them. In other words, people hide their wealth. Looks, both in prosperity and poverty, can be so deceiving.
By the 1970s, Kenyans are becoming concerned about this rapid increase in population. By the 1990s, the birth rate had dropped to 4.6 children per woman, and one of the fastest declines in fertility ever reported. After that initial dramatic decline, there has been no significant, subsequent decline in the last 20 years. Why? One of the significant reasons is that researchers went to HIV/AIDS at the expense of birth control. Family planning has been neglected so that the current demand is not even being met. It is estimated that 25% of the women in Kenya who want contraceptives are unable to access them. The prohibition on giving U.S. funds to family planning groups by the Reagan administration and both Bush administrations badly hurt the availability of resources for family planning. So I have a question, does that change with Obama?
Yeah, except it takes a while for these things to get trickled down.
Right.
In the United States, we have two words, guest and stranger. These have different connotations, as the first is someone welcomed and entertained, while the second is treated with suspicion. In Swahili, there is only one word, mgeni, is that right? Mgeni? For both guest and stranger. In other words, strangers are treated like guests. For this reason, Americans find Africans especially warm and friendly.
When you see all those pictures of people fleeing with goods on their heads, where will the women sleep that night? Many will have to find a man, perhaps a soldier or policeman, to protect them for the night. The cost is consensual rape, the agreement to have sex with the protector. This relationship might last a night or two, or a week, or a month, but in the end it is temporary, and the woman is turned out and has to find another protector. The result is unwanted pregnancies and HIV.
The most shocking thing for me was the story of one of the women clients who had brought her husband to Germany. His first wife had died of AIDS. His second wife had died of AIDS. His third wife had died of AIDS. And now his fourth wife was HIV positive. It seemed that men lived much longer than women did when they became HIV positive. Casilda explained to me that the reason for this is that the men had more access to meat, milk, and medicine.
with better nutrition, they live longer.
One of the most outrageous examples of this involved a Rwandan Quaker we worked with who was part of a documentary. In describing her, the film crew noted that she had 2 children and then showed a picture of starving children sitting dirtily on the ground. I had just taken a picture of this woman with her 2 healthy, well-dressed, happy children. I made a copy of this picture and sent it to the movie producers and asked them to insert the picture of her real children in place of the derogatory one. I am uncertain if this happened.
The second major assumption that needs to be questioned is that the Africans are doing this corruption on their own. The kleptomaniac president of former Zaire, now Democratic Republic of the Congo, Sese Seko Mobutu, is supposed to have said, "I know I am corrupt, but who is corrupting me?" Almost all of the cases of grand corruption in Africa include foreign companies or international organizations. This includes corporations, the United States, foreign governments, and non-governmental organizations. The fact is that when funds come from overseas, local citizens have little knowledge or resources to track how these funds are spent. The foreign donors are extremely lax, as they consider siphoning off of funds as normal. It is only when the missing funds become outrageous that any action is taken.
To become really rich, do not become a Wall Street stockbroker. Become the president or minister of an African country. 2 of the sons of former Kenyan President Daniel Arap Moi, both of whom were members of parliament at various times, are reported to have wealth of over $500 million. The Mars Group, an anti-corruption organization, estimates that Philip Moi's net worth is $770 million. None of this wealth would have been inherited since former President Moi is still alive. Superstar Michael Jackson's wealth at the time of his death was considerably less than this amount. International bribery is the reason that warlords and rebels try to overthrow governments in Africa, looting, killing, and raping in the process. To them, these are only small costs in comparison to the potentially huge rewards.
Okay, I've got